There are places in Africa where the forest does not simply grow. It remembers, where the trees do not merely stand. They watch. And when the wind moves through their branches, it is not just air that stirs, but the whispers of spirits long enthroned in bark and root. This is no ordinary forest. This is a shrine without walls, a cathedral older than any temple built by human hands. Beneath its canopy, the ground breathes, the trees speak, and the gods awaken. Before kingdoms rose and cities stood, before men carved laws into stone, there were sacred groves, untouched and trembling with power. In these groves lived beings that bore no human face. They were not idols of clay or stone, but living trees, animated by ancestral spirits and elemental deities. In Yoruba lands, they call upon Iroko, the eternal tree who watches time like a silent judge. Among the Igbo, the Oji, Kola tree, is not just fruit, it is spirit, it is oath, it is sacrifice. In the Congo, the forest is alive with Nkisi, spirits that inhabit roots and vines, demanding respect and invoking protection. These were the first temples, the wild, breathing sanctuaries where humanity met the divine in leaf and shadow. Trees became oracles, roots became altars. Forest clearings became courts where justice was spoken through rustling leaves and the stillness of birds. Here, the living came to meet the ancestors. Here, offerings were left at the feet of tree deities, and the cries of newborns were carried to the sky by the breath of the forest. But today, many walk past these trees and see only wood. They do not hear the silence that speaks. They do not sense the eyes in the bark or the heartbeat in the trunk. The sacred is now ignored, but it has not vanished. The guardians are still there, waiting, watching. In this journey, we return to the roots. We will uncover the ancient stories of African tree deities, the rituals of the forest people, and the taboos that protected these sacred beings from time and trespass. We will listen to the trees again, because the forest is not empty. The gods are still inside. There are trees you do not touch, not because they are large or ancient, but because they are alive in a way the ordinary world has forgotten. They are not simply plants, but portals, not simply rooted in soil, but anchored in spirit. Across Africa, these trees stand like eternal witnesses, carriers of memory, guardians of law, and vessels of the divine. Let us begin with the Iroko. In Yoruba cosmology, this is not merely a tree, it is a presence. Towering and quiet, the Iroko is said to be older than kings, older than even Orunmila, the deity of wisdom. It is believed to house powerful spirits, some say even a god in disguise. The Iroko stands alone, unclimbed, uncut, unchallenged. Those who defy it often suffer madness, misfortune, or death. In some villages, its base is marked with white chalk and offerings of kola, gin, and feathers. Nobody cuts its bark, nobody burns its branches. When it dies, it is not felled, but left to collapse naturally, as if its soul must choose its own exit from the world. The Iroko's shade is thick and strange. Birds do not sing there. Children are told to stay away. Yet it is also a tree of hope. When someone seeks justice beyond human hands, they whisper to the Iroko. When a promise must bind generations, the Iroko bears witness. In certain rituals, the Iroko becomes a doorway, a place where ancestral spirits descend to speak, to judge, to heal. But while the Iroko looms tall in the forests of Nigeria, the baobab reigns across the savannas of West and Central Africa. Thick-trunked and mighty, the baobab is called the tree of life, but that title barely scratches its sacred depth. Among the Dogon of Mali, the baobab is said to be the first tree, planted by the creator Amma as a seed of order in a chaotic world. Its roots point to the underworld. Its branches mirror the heavens. To the untrained eye, the baobab looks like a tree growing upside down, and perhaps that's because it belongs to two worlds at once. In Senegal and Gambia, old baobabs are used as tombs for griots and spiritual elders. These aren't graves of death, but chambers of eternal memory. When the wind whistles through a hollow baobab, it is said to be the voices of the honored dead, speaking back to those who still listen. The bark is used in healing. The leaves are crushed for medicine. And yet, if a baobab stands in silence near a crossroads, villagers know to walk the long way around. Now let us wander deeper into the forest, into the forbidden groves. These are not made for human feet. These are living temples, dense with vines, shadows, and spirits that do not forgive intrusion. The Igbo people speak of Ogbunike, sacred groves where ancestors dwell, where divination occurs, and where oaths are spoken into the trees themselves. A grove is not entered without reason. One must be pure, one must carry offerings, and one must not speak carelessly, because every leaf might be listening. These groves were protected by both taboo and tradition. In ancient times, if a ruler dared to clear a sacred grove for farming or war, misfortune would fall upon his household. Crops would die. Rain would vanish. His children would grow sick. It was understood. The groves were not empty lands. They were cities of the unseen. Spirits danced there. Ancestors walked there. Gods slept there. Even in Ghana, among the Akan, groves called Abosamfi, houses of the lesser gods, were hidden in deep forest places. A person might be taken there blindfolded, initiated, and never find the way back. The spirits of rivers, mountains, and trees all converged there, guarded by powerful fetish priests who spoke in tongues and controlled fire without burning. In the past, these groves were also courts. Disputes were brought before the trees. If a man swore falsely under the branches of a god's grove, he would not live to see the next moon. Justice was not written in scrolls. It was woven into root and vine. In these groves, the laws of the spirit outweighed the laws of men. But modernity does not walk with reverence. Roads are carved. Groves are cleared. The silence is broken. Yet in some villages, the people still remember. They still tip their drinks to the Iroko. They still lay white cloths at the feet of the baobab. They still forbid children from laughing too loud near the groves. Because somewhere deep inside, below the soil, behind the bark, they know the gods are still watching. The elemental deities of the forest are not myth. They are memory. They are presence. They are warning and promise, justice and shelter, spirit and flesh. And they are waiting for the world to remember them again. Beneath the great trees, the veil thins. Beneath their branches, spirit and body become one. In Africa's spiritual traditions, trees are not only homes to the divine, they are stages for its descent. Rituals performed in their shadows are not ceremonies for the eyes of man, but calls to the ears of the unseen. They summon gods. They awaken ancestors. And sometimes they take hold of the human body, turning man into message and woman into vessel. It begins with a drum. No ritual opens without rhythm. The beat must be specific, ancient, and known to the spirit being called. For each tree, a different tone. For Iroko, a slow, thunderous rhythm, like wood striking wood in the darkness. For baobab, a rolling pulse that mimics heartbeat and memory. The drum calls the spirit. The chant opens the door. Possession is not feared, it is honored. In the grove, a priest or priestess may begin to tremble, their breath short, their voice altered. They may speak languages never taught, or move with grace beyond their years. This is not theater. This is spirit embodiment. The deity or ancestral force that dwells within the tree has come forward, borrowed a body, and walked briefly among the living. This moment is sacred. Those watching fall silent or prostrate themselves, for to mock or doubt is to invite a curse. Sometimes the spirit speaks in riddles, sometimes in fire. Sometimes it reveals secrets no human could know, exposing lies, healing disease, naming the unseen force behind a village's misfortune. Trees do not lie, and the spirits that live in them do not flatter. Their words are law, their instructions binding. But not every tree ritual involves possession. Many are rites of sacrifice. The old ways demand offering, because nothing divine comes without price. Goats are tethered, feathers are burned, palm wine is poured slowly into the roots. In some traditions, hair or blood is offered, not for pain, but for connection, a piece of the self given to the spirit, forming a covenant between flesh and bark. Children brought to a tree for naming. Couples seek the blessing of fertility. Warriors pour libations before battle. Farmers offer the first yam, the first fruit, the first stalk of grain, so that the land may remain fertile. Everything returns to the tree, because the tree is life, and not all offerings are material. In many sacred forests, there are taboos, divine laws laid down by the spirits of the trees. A person may be forbidden from cutting wood on a certain day, or from entering the grove during menstruation or mourning. Breaking these taboos is not merely sin, it is disruption of the cosmic balance. Illness, drought, or even death can follow. In some communities, a spirit offender must undergo cleansing rituals, fasting, seclusion, or ritual baths using herbs gathered from the grove under moonlight. Only then can balance be restored. These rituals are not primitive superstition. They are a spiritual technology, refined over generations, encoded with ecological wisdom and ancestral truth. In Ghana, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Congo, these systems govern not only the human-spirit relationship, but also protect biodiversity. Sacred groves, because of their spiritual taboos, have become biological sanctuaries. Medicinal plants, rare animals, and old-growth trees flourish there, not because of science, but because of spirit. But the rituals are fading. Chainsaws drown out the drums. Plastics now litter paths once swept with palm fronds. Children no longer learn the chants. Elders die with their names unspoken. The sacred trees cry out, but few still understand their language. And yet, not all is lost. In certain corners of Benin and Togo, Vodun priests still speak to the forest. In southern Nigeria, the Osun Grove still pulses with presence, where the Osun River winds through sacred woods, and worshippers still kneel at ancient shrines embedded in roots and stone. In Mali, baobabs still hold court in dusty villages, honored as wise elders of the land. The rituals continue, quietly, faithfully, waiting for the world to remember what it once knew, that spirit lives in wood, and truth walks in the trees. To walk into a sacred grove is to walk into a courtroom of eternity. To dance under a tree's watch is to join a dance older than language. To pour wine on its roots is not to waste. It is to invest in the unseen, the eternal, the divine. These are not dead practices. These are living conversations with forces that never stopped listening. And so, the rituals of the trees continue, shaped by fire, sacrifice, chant, and possession. They are the keys to harmony, to healing, to heritage. They are how the land speaks, how the ancestors remember, and how the gods remind us. The forest is still sacred. When the ships came, they did not just carry people. They carried gods, spirits, trees, and names. In the dark belly of slave ships, beneath shackles and silence, something else stirred. Memory. The sacred groves of Africa, the Iroko, the Baobab, the forests of Orunmila and Osanyin, crossed the ocean in the minds and bones of the enslaved. They were not lost, they were replanted. In Haiti, Cuba, Brazil, Jamaica, and the American South, African spirituality reshaped itself, not abandoned, but hidden beneath layers of survival. And in the rituals of Santeria, Candomblé, Vodou, and Hoodoo, the spirits of the forest rose again. They were called by new names, disguised in Catholic saints, cloaked in secrecy. But their roots remained the same. In Candomblé, the Brazilian spiritual system born of Yoruba belief, the forest god Osanyin remains revered. He is the lord of herbs, leaves, and healing, and his domain is the forest. Even now, his priests collect sacred plants in ritual silence, offering prayers before each cut, just as their ancestors did in the groves of Ife and Ijebu. The leaves are not mere plants. They are sacred instruments. They heal because they remember. They cure because they carry spiritual codes from a time when nature and divinity were one. In Haitian Vodou, spirits known as LWA inhabit trees, rivers, and stones. One such spirit, Ayizan, is the guardian of the marketplace and initiations. But she also governs sacred knowledge passed through trees. Her veves, sacred symbols drawn in cornmeal, often resemble branches or leaves. Rituals to honor her are performed near groves or beneath trees, echoing practices long rooted in Dahomey and Yoruba lands. And then there is the Congo diaspora, Bantu spiritual systems carried to Brazil and the Caribbean, where trees are not only sacred but are believed to be literal doors between the world of the living and the dead. In Palomayombe, a tradition rooted in Central African spirituality, the most powerful altars, called Nganga, must contain sacred wood from specific trees. These are not just materials. They are living deities within iron cauldrons, guardians of cosmic law. Even in the American South, among the descendants of enslaved Africans, trees have retained their power. In Gula traditions and hoodoo practices, large oaks and cypresses are often tied with cloth, spoken to in prayer, and honored with offerings. These spirit trees are the remnants of African groves, reborn in Carolina swamps and Georgia backwoods. What is most mysterious and most beautiful is this. Though these communities were scattered, severed from language, tribe, and temple, the trees continued to speak. Across oceans, the rituals remained. Offerings of rum, tobacco, blood, and feathers. Songs sung beneath branches. Sacred silence before gathering herbs. Taboos against cutting sacred trees. And the unshakable belief that spirit lives in nature, and that trees are alive with eyes. The diaspora did not merely preserve African spirituality. It transformed it, hybridized it, gave it new soil, but the root was always African. The language may change, but the rhythm remains. The gods, though renamed, still recognize their drum beats. This transference across waters is not accidental. It is ancestral resistance. When colonizers told Africans their gods were dead, they whispered prayers into the bark. When masters banned their rituals, they danced them in secret under moonlit trees. When memory began to fade, the forest remembered for them. The forest has always been a sanctuary. In maroon societies, hidden communities of escaped slaves, trees were allies. Forests became hiding places, healing places, spiritual fortresses, and within them, the old rituals were preserved. Trees became temples, vines became veils, drums became the pulse of something eternal. Today, that spirit is still alive. In New Orleans, in Havana, in Salvador da Bahia, in Port-au-Prince, altars are still built under trees. Initiates still bow before branches. Rituals still begin with a whisper to the leaves. And in Africa too, the groves remain, though threatened by bulldozers and forgetfulness. This is why the story of the African forest spirits matters, not only for heritage, but for healing. In a world rapidly disconnecting from nature, the ancestral memory of sacred trees offers a path back. These traditions do not merely tell us to respect nature. They demand that we commune with it, that we listen to it, that we understand the voice of bark, the silence of roots, the prophecy of leaves. Because the African forest is not history, it is inheritance. Its spirits were never defeated, only hidden. And now, they rise again in song, in ritual, in film, in YouTube channels, in documentaries, in whispered stories passed from grandmother to child. The diaspora still remembers. Not always in the same names, not always in the same languages, but the soul recognizes the forest, and the forest, in turn, recognizes the soul. The forest has never forgotten us. Even as we cut it down, even as we paved over its roots, burned its leaves, and silenced its groves, it waited, quietly, faithfully, like a grandmother at the edge of the village, sitting beneath a tree she planted in her youth, waiting for her children to remember her face. We are living in an age of forgetting. We forget the power of silence. We forget the language of wind and the wisdom of rivers. We forget that the gods once walked beside us in the shade of trees, that we once sang to leaves before we took them, and poured libations before we ate. The sacred forest was never just a backdrop. It was the first temple, the original cathedral. Its pillars were trunks. Its hymns were birdsong. Its incense was morning dew. But now, a stirring, a return. In Nigeria, youth are returning to Osun's Grove, rebuilding shrines, asking questions their elders fear to answer. In Ghana, young herbalists are learning not just what heals, but who. In Congo, in Senegal, in Cameroon, sacred groves are being protected not just for their trees, but for their spirits. Across the Black Atlantic, in Brazil, Cuba, and the American South, African spirituality is no longer whispered in shame. It is sung, filmed, posted, revived. And in this rising tide, the forest waits, not to judge, but to reinitiate, to teach again. Because the forest does not keep time like man. It remembers what we forget. It holds what we bury. It whispers what we silence. To return to the sacred trees is not only an act of cultural pride, it is an act of spiritual survival. It is to remember the law that was never written in books, but carved in bark. The law that says life is circular, that nothing truly dies, that all things return. That spirit lives in every leaf and echo. Our ancestors knew this. That's why they built no temples. The trees were already there. That's why they had no idols. The wind and sun were enough. That's why their gods were not far away in the sky. They were here, in the rustle of branches, the fall of fruit, the animals' cry at dusk. The modern world teaches us to master nature, but our ancestors were taught to serve it, to be in relationship with it, to speak to it, sing with it, walk with it barefoot and unafraid. They knew the trees by name, not their scientific labels, but their spiritual titles. The healer, the gatekeeper, the ancestor's spine, the mother of voices. Each tree had a story, each grove a prophecy, each fallen leaf a message from the other world. So what now? We return. We return by honoring sacred groves as ecological sanctuaries. We return by listening to elders who still remember the chants. We return by documenting, filming, telling, and retelling these stories, not as superstition but as science of the soul. We return by building spaces, physical and digital, where these truths can live again. Channels like yours, my lord, become the new groves, places where the ancient meets the algorithm, where ancestral knowledge finds new breath. We return by planting trees, not just for climate, but for spirit. By raising children who know that before you take, you ask. Before you cut, you pray. Before you eat, you give thanks. We return by knowing that possession is not always madness. It is sometimes miracle. That dance is not always entertainment. It is sometimes invocation. That trees are not just wood. They are memory, deity, and doorway. The forest will never shout for attention. It is not like man. It does not demand. It waits. But when you step into it with respect, when you open your spirit, when you whisper back its name, it answers. Always. Softly, powerfully, eternally. This is not the end of the story. This is the reawakening. Because when the trees rise again in our hearts, so too do the gods. So too do the ancestors. So too does the wisdom that was never lost, only hidden. The spirit of the forest still breathes. Let us breathe with it.